Hey, it's Power Golf, Power Fitness. My name's Bill Ebersol, and we have another analysis here of a World Long Drive athlete. His name is Mark Stoneking. He competes in the senior division of World Long Drive. He does pretty well. He usually makes it to the final eight in that. One of the older competitors. I think he's about 55, 56 years old. He still is very competitive. He swings the club over 130 miles an hour routinely, which is pretty darn good for somebody over 55. He's won a couple of world titles on the Ultimate Long Drive Tour. I think at a total of four of them over the last couple of years in the 50 and 55 and over division. They do a thing where you can compete in amateur and professional concurrently, and I think he's racked up a few world titles doing that over the last 2 years. So I guess a senior golfer, he's a good guy to look at. Actually, for anyone there's not too many junior golfers or adult golfers who could swing over 130 miles an hour. So definitely an interesting case study here. He's a pretty tall guy. I think he's about 6'2", 6'3", might be even taller than that. He's got long arms and long legs, which he uses in his golf swing to his advantage. He's got a really good golf swing. So let's get started here. So we're going to be looking at his kinetic sequence. I'll quickly go over what that is. It's three forces. We're using Smart to Move 3D force plates here, and they measure, and we're going to be looking at three forces that they measure here. The first force is called lateral force, which is essentially moving your body parallel to the ground. And for golf, that's moving your body to and from the target. So just think of kind of shifting your hips left and right. That would be an example of using lateral force. The next force is called vertical torque, which is essentially rotation, how fast, how efficiently you're rotating. And the third force we're going to take a look at is vertical force. And that is essentially, pushing your body up and away from the ground, pushing the golf club up and away from the ground. Just think of jumping. That's essentially what that is. I like to say the golf swing is a bump, rotate, and jump, and you need to do it in that order. And if you can do it in that order, you're definitely steps ahead when it comes to doing an efficient golf swing. Let's get started here. I'll kind of describe what you're looking at on the screen really quickly. You're going to see some squiggly lines on the bottom. The black line is the lateral force measurement. The yellow line is the vertical torque measurement. And the reddish orange line is the vertical force measurement. You're going to see some numbers just to the right. Those squiggly lines are on the bottom half of the screen, just to the right of those. They show FY, that's lateral force, TZ, that's vertical torque, and FZ, that's vertical force. And I'll give you some reference numbers as we go through it here to tell you how good Mark is doing here producing those forces. Above that, on the above the upper right hand quadrant, you're going to see digital representation of the force plates. You're going to see a blue arrow, yellow arrow, and red arrow. The blue arrow is what his lead foot is doing. The yellow arrow does two things. It shows the vertical torque. So when that arrow gets longer, he's producing more vertical torque. It also moves back and forth. It shows the center of pressure between the lead leg and the trail leg. The red arrow is what the trail leg is doing. Those arrows, basically, if you see an arrow pointed in a certain direction, his foot is pushing in the opposite direction. So right now you can see the arrows are kind of pushed towards him, like the red and the blue arrow are kind of angled in towards his head. That means he's kind of essentially, like, if you think of like you're standing on a towel and you're trying to basically spread that towel apart beneath your feet. And that's a great way to stand in a golf swing to get started. It gives you kind of a good firm base to move against. Lower left of those force plates, digital force plates, you'll see, as you're going to see the percentage of the force he's putting under each foot. It's either the force or you can say the force or the weight. It's actually force. You could literally have, your weight more on one side, but be producing more force on the other side. You could basically lean over to your right, but then it really extend down hard that left leg, and that you will actually show more force being produced in the left leg. So just something to think about. We'll touch on that a little bit later. And of course, on the upper left-hand corner, upper left-hand quadrant is the video of Mark's swing. First thing I'm gonna do is just kind of give you, just gonna hit play, and you can kind of take a look at what he does in fast motion here. So there we go. We'll hit play. So Mark likes to build slowly into his backswing. I've talked before about most long drivers have a quick backswing. Mark does not really have that quick of a backswing, but we're going to see why he does what he does in a minute. There's two ways to build force. You can build force by moving as fast as you can at the beginning, or you can build force gradually. And what Mark does is he builds his lateral force very gradually in his backswing, and then he really explodes down on his downswing. There's all kinds of ways of getting it done. That's the way Mark gets it done. So let's go ahead and start this in kind of frame by frame, essentially. So he'll start with just a little bit of a bump away from the target. I mean, literally, it's imperceptible, maybe an inch. You might have to have a big screen to see it, but literally after that inch, he's actually pushing towards the target with that trail leg. Even though he's shifting his weight onto his trail leg, he's using that trail leg to push his trail hip and his trail shoulder around the back of him and back towards the target. He's actually, his net force, lateral force, is going towards the target, not away. I mentioned this before in almost all my other videos. This is a very common trait amongst long drivers and good golfers, is even though they're making a backswing and shifting their weight onto their trail side, they're actually pushing towards the target. And as he is pushing towards the target, and you can see it's a pretty darn long backswing, and he's constantly pushing. He's really ramping up here, and he peaks at about just 10% of his body weight, 9.8% of his body weight lateral force. But again, he's done it for a long time. So that's, again, I've used the analogy before of pushing a car that's broken down on the side of the road. If you could create a lot of force to try to get that thing moving as fast as possible, but if you have a lot of space, you can kind of gradually start pushing that car and keep going and going and going, and eventually you're going to be building up a good amount of speed if you have enough time. So Mark just basically takes his time on his backswing. You could see at the top of his backswing here, he's just slightly biased towards his trail leg as far as his pressure and his weight is concerned. His peak lateral force is about 9.8%. So we'll go forward here. And again, that's the black line. And then there's the black number just to the upper, in the bottom half on the right-hand side. It's the black number under the FY. So that's his peak lateral force. That happens first, which is great. His next force that we're going to measure is his peak torque, 153 newtons of mass. Smart to Move has a number of about 84, and they say if you can hit 84, you're doing a darn good job with your rotation. And Mark hits 153. So he's doing a darn good job, a really, 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 really darn good job of rotating here. I'm going to go ahead, and if you want to look in the upper right-hand quadrant, I'm going to spin some stuff around, and you can see how those arrows are pointed in different directions here. Now, remember I mentioned that what we're looking at in the foreground is the under the right foot, and you see how the arrow is pointed up and away. What that actually means is he's pulling his foot behind him. So the foot is actually going the opposite direction of the arrow. So it makes more, and then of course it makes sense that the front foot, that arrow is, even though that arrow is pointed behind him, the foot is going towards the ball. So, and you can also see how, just by the length of the arrows there, how there's more pressure on that lead leg. This is if you have an issue with what's called early extension, you want to be pushing when you're trying to torque as fast, when you're trying to rotate, you want to be pushing harder on your lead leg than your trail leg. And that will basically cure early extension on the downswing for you. So just a little tip there for early extension. We're going to get into different videos on stuff like that later. But right now we're just focusing on Mark's kinetic sequence. So 153 newtons of mass. Again, that's a very sciencey term. I'm not sure what newtons of mass is. I know it's like if you do some kind of calculation, you can get percentage of body weight. But I'm not going to do that for you. I don't think we need to. The next metric we're going to look at is vertical force. So let's get to his peak vertical force, about 190. Now, 190 is a decent vertical force. It's about average for like an average PGA Tour player, but Mark swings it a lot faster than an average PGA Tour player. So his torque force is definitely higher than what the most PGA Tour players you would see. His vertical force and his lateral force are about average or even lower. But so how does Mark swing it faster? What I can see is there's two reasons. One is he's hitting his peak vertical force and that club is still perpendicular to the ground there. So a lot of PGA Tour players, that club will be a little bit lower than that. Some of them might be around there or a little bit higher. Lots of long drivers might have their club there. But Mark's is in a darn good position. What that means is he's got a lot of space for that club, for the force he's created to get to the ball. We're going to just backtrack a touch. I want to show you where his peak torque is. His peak torque, it looks like he's still in his backswing when he's hitting his peak torque number. So that creates a lot of space for that club to reach the ball. Now, I don't like saying a lot of time because the club's moving very fast, so we don't want it to take a lot of time to get from the top of the backswing to the ball. We want it to move quickly down there. So, but he's in a great position there. A bad amateur player, they might hit their peak torque number there and then their peak vertical force number right around there. And by that time, it's just way too late for those forces to actually get to the club head. But Mark's in great position there. 190, which is a darn good number. One other thing I like to point out is I want to show you where the center, if you want to look in the upper right-hand quadrant, the center of pressure is really biased towards his front foot. But if you look at the upper left-hand quadrant, you can tell his actual weight. Just by looking, he must have more of his body is behind the center line than ahead of it. But if you look at over on the right quadrant, you can see he's creating a lot more pressure in that lead leg. So the center of pressure and what the force plates are saying the distribution of weight is biased towards the front leg. But if you took a line and drew it right at, halfway between his two ankles, you would definitely see more than half of his body is on the trail side. So what he's creating here by doing that is what's called a moment arm. And what a moment arm is you have your center of mass. Just imagine a golf ball, between, basically right between your belly button and your spine. That's where your center of mass, if you're standing normally, would be. Now, you can move that center of mass around by moving different body parts. So like if you move your arms up, that center of mass will move up. If you move your arms to the side, that center of mass will move to the side. So let's take a look at where Mark's arms are at this point. They're way off to a side. So his center of mass is probably, closer to his trail foot than it is his lead foot. But his center of pressure is closer to his lead foot. That is creating leverage. That is, and the more space you can create between those two things, you're creating a longer lever, so to speak. So it's kind of like if you have I'm going to use another car analogy here. If you need to put a spare tire on your car and you have to take off the lug nuts and you try to turn those lug nuts by hand, you may not be able to do it unless you're super strong. That'd be very impressive if you could. But what you usually use is a lug wrench. And what that lug wrench does is it creates leverage because you get your hand further away from the center of mass, which is the lug nut. So you're creating a longer moment arm by getting your hand at the end of that lug wrench, and that allows you to break that lug nut free, creates extra torque, and that extra torque gives you extra distance. So we'll get Mark going to the end of his swing here. Lots of lag that he retains very late and then releases it at just the right time. I mean, you can see right about impact there, his shaft is perpendicular to the ground. And again, you see that left leg, that left foot kind of swimming around, or flying around in the air, and then it kind of lands left of his starting point there. That's very common amongst long drivers because of all that force they put in that lead foot. So it doesn't look, it's not a very long swing. He does it by creating a lot of leverage really quickly. He creates a lot of torque very early into a swing, and he maintains that torque all the way through a swing until impact. So that is Mark Stoneking's way of hitting over 130 miles an hour, being over 55 years old and winning world titles. So thanks again, and we'll get more of these videos posted. Bye.